Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Robb Gilbear. Robb has been many things in his life. He was a people and culture leader in the tech world, he's created profitable businesses in 3 different industries, and he was a very successful DJ and music producer. But now, Robb is the founder of Growth Habit, where he helps other purpose-driven coaches to make money while making a difference. So now he is... let me just take a breath here and say this. Now he's a life coach. But please don't hold that against him. Ladies and gentlemen, Robb Gilbear. Robb, welcome to the show.
Now I know why you're like, don't kill me. I'm not a life coach. Although,
Well, you're kind of
I
a
am.
life coach.
But I am. Yeah. Well, this is the funny thing about that is any label that you put on a coach, no matter if they help you with business results or with your branding or with your relationships, all that stuff, the good ones, if you peel away the layers, they are also a life coach because there's no separating the business from your life, the relationships from your life, etc. So.
It's interesting to figure out why that has gotten such a bad name. I mean, guess there's a case of this idea of it being a pretentious thing that, who are you to tell other people how to live their life? But perhaps the most pretentious thing is for us to think that we don't need a life coach. Because if you look at most people's lives, I mean, all of us, we need a lot of help. We don't know what we're doing. So why would you not want a coach? I guess that's something to do with it.
I think it's anything that gets popular, and it's growing in popularity. And I love the way you're poking fun of like, who are we to think we don't need a coach, right? Historically, there was organized religion, there was stronger community, there was all these other places and ways that people had guidance, mentorship, people to go to, and as some of those older models are eroding, people are seeking a North Star, help, someone to help them untangle their mess, and coaching has become popular. But it's very easy to poke fun at. I see the humor in it. So
I guess that a lot about coaching that people don't get is how it's so difficult to see what's going on from inside the bottle. I've heard you use this expression. A lot of people have used it. I've used it when I was talking about how it is so much easier for me to help someone come up with their origin story or their signature story. But it's very difficult for me to write my own. And, I have done so, but it feels like you're pulling teeth. And it's something that I guess a lot of people just don't realize, that you don't need someone to be a master at whatever they're trying to coach you. I mean, they should be good enough and they should have a pretty good grasp of whatever they're talking about. But sometimes just being able to see it from the outside allows you to say, well, what about that thing? I mean, shouldn't you be paying more attention to that? And that alone you don't need to be the world's expert. You just need to be able to help. And if you're able to help for the price you're charging them, then I think that's fair.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's very easy to get lost in our own stuff, because I'm sure if we started thinking about your world, the children, there's the chores, you need to take the car to get the oil changed, there's those 2 people you haven't replied to from yesterday, there's that podcast you haven't edited yet, the neighbor asked you something, you forgot about this, the last time you spoke to your brother, it was a little annoying, like with layers and layers, like it is so noisy, and it's very easy to get caught up in all of our stuff. So yeah, the outsider perspective, someone who's not in the mud between your ears, who can ask some powerful questions and who can maybe just reflect some things back. Because that's one of the coolest things for me is sometimes I have an inkling. Okay, Francisco's good at this. Francisco seems to, like I find you really funny, etc. But I don't know. It's one of the most fun parts of being in a coaching conversation with someone is I'm asking questions and I don't know where it's going to go. And if I lead with that curiosity and just trying to play the role of reflection and mirror, the answer that comes out or the solution that person pulls out of themselves is almost always better than what I thought it could have been if I did allow myself to try and think of something. So yeah, it's the same reason why people I think enjoy psychedelics or go traveling. Just anything gets you out of your mundane routine. Like sometimes I take a different way to walk to the office. And I'm like, wow, I'm in a different city. And it's like, no, I'm just walking a different route that I haven't walked the last 29 times I've walked to my office. So yeah, just juxtaposition and contrast helps a lot in those positions. Your audio is cut.
Jesus. See, I told you not to use the mute button, and then I go and use the mute button. A friend of mine was in Amsterdam, and he made this mistake that a lot of people have made in Amsterdam, which is he bought some edibles. So this was a muffin or something that was filled with pot, and you never know how strong these things are. But the mistake that everybody makes is you eat half of it, and then 2 hours later nothing has happened, and you think, okay, that wasn't enough, I need to have some more. So he did that, and what happened to him was the most extreme reaction to that problem that I've ever seen, because not only he got high, but he remained high for I think 2 or 3 days, including when he had to fly back from Amsterdam. So he was completely fried, and he's at the airport, and he's like bug-eyed, and he's paranoid, and his missus is like, you need to start looking normal, they're not gonna let us board this plane, and he just couldn't. So he boarded the plane, and he spent the whole trip like this. And for anyone who's not watching this, I'm just sort of leaning back and looking with a completely horrified look of it, like everything seems scary. So yeah, traveling and psychedelics on their own, good ideas to expand your mind. Together, perhaps not.
Maybe not. I like that story a lot. Amsterdam is one of those places that's known for that. And it makes me think of the first time I went to Whistler, BC in Canada. And I got there, and I was going there for a music thing back when I was DJing, and I got a taxi to take me to the nightclub where I was playing, started chit-chatting with the driver. He's asking where I was from. He asked me if I'd ever been before, and then his demeanor changed. He got very serious, and he looked at me like a parental look. He says, I'm going to give you some advice. And I was like, okay. And because the tone shifted, I was like, all right. So I sat up. I'm like, this is serious all of a sudden. He's like, I don't care what you've smoked back home. Take it easy, because the shit out here is way more powerful than anything you've had in Toronto. 2, have fun, but don't have too much fun. I came here for a couple months to enjoy myself. That was 10 years ago. Now I'm driving you to the party.
Yeah. Yes, that is. I've seen a lot of people fall for that mistake, and I'm not saying it's the same situation as this guy, because it had. Actually, probably had something to do with illegal substances. But I went to London thinking I was going to stay there for 6 months, and I left 5 years later. So just a small part of it had to do with illegal substances, I think. No, but we talked about you mentioned. Well, I told a story, and then it just reminded me of a story I'm not sure I ever told you that I think has some connection to our story together, because our story, I don't know if we ever told anyone else about this, but the way you and I got to know each other was that I think you had listened to the podcast, and then you reached out to be a guest in the podcast, and I essentially said no, because I couldn't quite see the fit there. But what I didn't tell you is that there is a precedent for people that I meet either in Canada or from Canada that get rejected and end up becoming a significant part of my life later. Because I don't know if you know this, but my wife now, so I met her in Canada, and I was actually with her for a while, then I got rejected, and then I wasn't with her for many, many years, and then eventually we made it work. So, the initial rejection doesn't actually mean anything in my relationships.
I don't think it needs to. I think it's funny because obviously it'd be interesting to hear how that rejection went in your relationship, but it's all about how it's handled. Because it's not, I reached out and I said, hey, I enjoyed this podcast. I'd love to be a guest if that was an option. And you were very polite in being like, I don't see the connection. But you weren't rude. And I still enjoyed the conversation, and I still enjoyed your content. So we continued to kind of follow each other's path and content. So yeah, relationships, they don't have to have some story tale kind of beginning and ending. And it sounds like it's worked out for your marriage. So
what you're saying is that after I rejected you, you didn't get completely destroyed, could not do anything useful for many years, to the extent that you went a continent away to escape the horror and the pain of that heartbreak. That's what you're saying didn't happen to you. So maybe our stories are not that similar.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. But in fairness, I think the amount of investment I had in the relationship at that point was very low, right? It sounds like you had a lot more emotion and feeling and care and love invested in the relationship up to that point. Where for me, it was you were a stranger whose thing I enjoyed, so I pinged you. So
Yes,
different.
I think that's a fair assessment of the situation. Oh, and this is something else. I don't know if I've ever told you, but one of the one of the things I've started doing on LinkedIn, this is maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, is that I always used to post telling stories, but the one thing I hadn't really done was what's the word? Skits, comedy sketches, skits. What's the word? I'm completely forgetting. I'm blank.
Skit. You could say skit or sketches. Both are good. Both would
Okay,
mean
okay, so
both would
whichever,
people would
comedy
understand
sketches.
both.
Yeah, so the one thing I hadn't done was comedy sketches with characters. So I've done a few now. And the character, the original character I invented, it wasn't in any way inspired by you, but it was a tiny bit inspired by your the headline you use on social media, because so you talk about purpose-driven coaches, and purpose is one of the words that is mostly abused when it comes to social media and to coaching. And I created this character Clyde, who helps purpose driven coaches find their purpose. And I'm like, but if the purpose driven, don't they have purpose already? And it's like, well, not necessarily. And again, Clyde has evolved to become everything that hopefully I'm not, and that I don't want people to be. But I think the very first beginning was just this idea of purpose, and how people just toss that word around without having a great, it's not that a word that is not very useful, and it is, but it's gotten somewhat abused. But you clearly don't mind it because you still use it. So why do you think that's still very important to have there? And then after that, I'll go into the story stuff, because otherwise we'll talk about other random stuff forever.
I think I'm okay with it because I'm not trying to help anyone find their purpose or trying to like sell purpose or anything like that. So there's a bit of a disconnect with Clyde. And the people who I tend to enjoy working with the most, the people who are excited to work with me, people who have the best results, the people where it never feels like I'm working and they tend to have the best outcomes, are people who self identify that they really want to make some kind of impact. They want to have some kind of purpose. They don't want to just work in corporate, that they feel that they are meant for something bigger. And all that's a mouthful, and purpose is just a very easy way to say it. So I'm not going to try to say, figure out your purpose. I'm going to help you find your purpose. I'm selling purpose. But anyone who identifies with, they want to make impact, they want to help people, they want to make some kind of a difference, and all of that. Purpose is a word. Heart led is another one I was kind of playing around with, like heart led people, people that are more empathetic and follow their hearts. A bit woo woo, and it's all like if you start, double clicking on any of those, then you can end up in a rabbit hole of crap.
I think you can say purpose with a straight face. I don't think I could say heart led with a straight face. I mean, even purpose, because I always think about this. I didn't call it this, but there's something I always say about speaking, and it applies to storytelling as well, which is think think you're in a bar, not on Broadway. And I had an interview very recently with Matthew Dix, and he calls it the dinner test, which I think goes even further. Where he says, if you wouldn't say it, or if you wouldn't do it to someone during dinner, then you shouldn't do it on stage when you're telling a story. So the hand gestures, the props, anything that people, lots of things that people would normally do on stage. He says, okay, but if you wouldn't do it to one person, then you shouldn't do it on stage, because then you're creating an artificiality and it's becoming a performance. Purpose, I think, a lot of people would find that word very strange if they're not into this world. But heart led, I mean, come on. So who are the guys? Who are the clients you? So who are the people that you really work with? I'm not sure I understand. I work with heart led coaches. Heartland, what the hell?
Oh, it's killing me. It's making me think there's someone I ran into recently who self-identifies himself as a micro influencer, and they have it on bios and they have it in places, and it fucking kills me. And me and my partner were laughing about it. Like, in what other purpose is the word micro good? And we were thinking micromanager, micro penis. Like, there's no other place where you need the
I like
word.
how you went from micromanagement to micro penis.
Well, we were trying to think, like, what are the other contexts that the word micro is used frequently? And those are the two that came to mind right away. So the fact that someone would identify themselves and label themselves as I'm a micro influencer, it just seems so weird. And it made me laugh as much as this heart led thing is making you laugh.
There is a context where the word micro could be used. It's not used in that context, but it could, which is the difference between when someone is telling a story, what they should focus on. And the mistake a lot of people make is they focus on the macro, they focus on the big thing happening, or even worse, they focus on a timeline of things happening, which is okay. You can explain what happened and how you became a coach or whatever your story you're trying to tell, and say, I was in corporate America and then this happened and then that happened and whatever. But that is not interesting. So in that context, what is interesting is the micro stuff. Is on this day, I got home and I was so frustrated that I shouted at my kid, and then my wife got angry with me. So in that context, that word could be used, but it's not used. And
Yeah.
now that now that you brought micro penis into the equation, I would never be able to see that word or hear that word without thinking about that. So thank you, Rob. You've now given me something that I'll carry with me for a very long time.
That's my gift to you.
Yes, yes. Um, okay, and this is our gift to the audience. All right. So I said earlier that when you originally reached out, I was struggling to see the fit. At the time, I didn't see the fit of how what you were doing had to do with stories. And I think you told me something like, that you use that a lot with clients. And it is something I will want to talk to you about before we're done. But actually, what occurred to me over the last week or so, when I was doing the research that I normally do, and after I took part in that webinar that you ran, is that the most interesting use of story that I think you make is not on is not in the work we do with clients, or at least I guess not, because I'm not a client. I don't know the work you do with clients exactly. But I think it might be in the way you attract clients. And I'm particularly thinking here about social media content, or at least the content that I'm familiar with, which is LinkedIn. So, can you just describe a bit what is your approach for having people approach for getting inbound leads, for people looking for you instead of you having to do outbound and get in touch with them yourself?
So there's a lot of the words know, like, and trust are used too much in marketing all the time. You hear it. People need to know, like, and trust you. Know, like, and trust you. And I was thinking about it and realized that it's backwards because the focus is focused externally too much and trying to make other people know, like, and trust you. And then it becomes a bit of a performance, like you were talking about.
Yes, Rob, let's pretend that nothing has just happened. We've not wasted almost 10 minutes of our time going back and coming back in trying to get over technology's hurdles. So you were saying, no, like, and trust, I guess.
It's funny because I took a picture of the way it froze on you, and you looked very serious, like you were already not happy with what was going on the way it froze. So you said that you feel that I use stories to attract clients, and you'll hear people say all the time, know, like, and trust. People need to know, like, and trust you. Your clients need to know, like, and trust you. And I think it's true, and I definitely use that intentionally. But I think that there is a big piece of that missing, and that the focus is the focus is initially on the wrong person. The focus is on making sure that other people know, like, and trust you. And this is where my coaching comes into play with myself. And do you know, like, and trust yourself? Do you like who you are? When you look in the mirror, do you like who you see? Do you know your strengths, your values, what really is important to you? Do you trust yourself? If you make yourself a promise, will you keep that promise? Or are you always just saying, oh, I'll get to that this weekend, and then you never do? And that's really key. And then once you have that dialed in, then it's really easy to show more of yourself to the world. And I think that's where I really intentionally use stories, is the limits around what I share to the world and what I won't share. There's not much. Like my children's names, my children's faces, because I want them to have a bit of a private life. Because I encountered some weird things before when they were younger, when I was doing well with music, where we'd be at the grocery store and a stranger would walk up to us and start talking and like they knew me, and it weirded out the kids. So I want to give them privacy. Short of that, there are a few things that I'm not willing to share publicly. And I share a lot of myself because I know who I am. I like who I am, and I trust myself. And then I very intentionally am sharing stories about my past, about my struggles, about things I'm experiencing, about things I know that are relatable, specifically because I'm really clear on who I'm speaking to. We were joking earlier about purpose-led or heart-led, and we were having all those laughs. But I know that the people that I'm meant to serve, the people who are most excited to work with me, the people who I can help the most, are people who have that kind of empathy, who have experienced difficulty, who are a creative person who maybe sometimes struggles with having too many ideas, who believes there's more to the world, and who's been through some shit and kind of back. So when I'm sharing myself, sharing my struggles, sharing my stories, it's in an intentional way so that I can connect with the people that I want to serve.
I think that word is a very important one, the connection. Because this is something that a lot of people don't get when it comes to not only story, but just most other forms of communication, is that for reasons that I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about, but most human beings are looking to hear or to feel from anyone else around them the four most important words in the English language. You are not alone. That's what we want from other people. So when we're seeing people communicating, we're looking for validation. We're looking for proof that whatever we're going through, or whatever hangups we have, or whatever things we struggle with ourselves, other people feel the same, that is the basic reason why sharing not necessarily failures, but sharing things you struggle with or sharing your challenges, that's what people resonate with. Because even though they can identify themselves with the success, and I always say that you have to be a bit of a knob to hear someone describing their success and go, oh, he's a successful guy just like me. But that's not the point. You don't have a hang up about that. You're not looking for validation about your success usually. You're looking for validation about the things you struggle with. So if what all people do is share where they're great at, yeah, maybe that can inspire some people, but inspiration and connection are very, very different things.
They really are. I love the way that you frame that I am not alone, because what happens when you're intentional with your messaging, with your stories, with the things that you're putting out there, is that it makes people feel seen, and it makes people feel seen and heard in a world where they feel sometimes like they're a number, like they don't matter, like they don't have a voice. So that you are not alone is such a powerful connection, and it makes a really big difference, and it cuts through all the clutter, especially in a world where people are just sharing highlight reels and people are just sharing their wins. And I'm speaking at this other conference and I just closed another deal, and look at me go. So when you're talking about...
I woke up and look at how awful I look. I just woke up like this.
With the perfect hair.
Yes.
Exactly.
I mean, that is true in my case. I mean, I generally wake up like this. But, for other people.
I think it goes to something that I've heard you speak about a bunch, which is relatability. And the importance of making something relatable in whatever it is that you're sharing in your messages and in your stories. And definitely I've spoken to this to my clients about, and it was cool when I heard you say it in your own way. It was like, oh, Francisco sees it the same way, because we think it has to be some big mega production. People think like, oh, if I'm putting content out, if I'm sharing stuff, if I'm putting my message out there, that it has to be so awe-inspiring, unbelievable, like a 1 in a million story. But the stuff that makes a difference is the relatable stuff. Like my children have chicken pox right now. It's been crazy the last few weeks. I shared that this week. I just put it out there that this is a kind of a challenge we're facing as a family, and I tied it back to being able to abstain from short-term rewards for long-term gains. But the amount of messages, the amount of inbox messages, like there's some people who I've been in conversation with about kind of business stuff are reaching out to me. And now there's this connection we have as parents because they have parents and they would hate to see their children sick. And the last time their son had a fever, it was really upsetting and huge connection.
I didn't actually know that people in real life did what they do in that Friends episode, where you just tie oven mitt to your hands to stop from scratching. I thought this was just a Friends thing. I don't remember if I had chicken pox, but no one did that to me if I had chicken pox. So I'm happy that your children have chicken pox. I'm really sorry for them. But I am happy to find out that the oven mitt thing is not just just not a sitcom trope.
It's not just a sitcom trope. And one of the comments actually is Colin, who's this really funny coach from the UK. He commented that when he was a kid and he was put to bed with mitts on, he lied to his parents. Is like, yes, of course I kept them on all night. Where he was like, no, I took them off and scratched like crazy. So apparently cross-cultural, cross countries, it's not just a sitcom thing. It's something that's used around the world, or at least in some of the other, G8 or G10 countries.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing, I think what you said there is very important, and it's a point I try to hammer as much as I can, which is that it's not really about what's actually happening in the story, as long as there's enough in there that people can relate to. So it doesn't matter if you have. So I have two children like you. They've not had chicken pox, right? And I don't remember if I had chicken pox. So I cannot relate to that, but I can relate to sick children. Like, and you don't even have to have had sick children. You have troubles with your children. There are things that are happening to your children that make you concerned, that make you worried. Or it can even be simpler than that. It can just be, I have this challenge in my hands. It's making me frustrated, and I don't know how to deal with it. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people that have read that and felt for you and not just pretended to feel for you. I'm sure there's plenty of those as well, but that's some that genuinely feel, oh crap, I mean, this sounds like a real big problem. And they might not be parents. They might not have anything that they can genuinely, like, oh no, yes, that I've lived. No, I know how that feels. That's it. I know how that feels. That's really all you're looking for. When you're telling a story to make it relatable. Now, having said that, if you can make it specifically relatable, that is more powerful. And I think that's something that you talk about as well with this idea of sharing stories about trigger events.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little about that? Yeah.
Yes. No, absolutely. The knowing where your clients. So I talk a lot about being really clear on who you're meant to serve. I call them dream clients. Doug, who I did that workshop with last week, he calls them your target clients. So we're right now with the stuff I'm doing with him, we're calling them target dream clients, ideal client, whatever.
Target dream clients might be, I think, too many chefs in that kitchen.
Too many chefs.
Just choose one.
But
or you could just go for your ideal clients.
Your ideal client. I don't like that. I see so many people use ideal clients. So, but
right, the clients you want.
The people you're meant to serve. We can go on and on. Either way, whatever label you want to use, but getting really clear on who those people are, and not demographics, psychographics. What are their values? What do they think of the world? Do they prioritize efficiency or creativity? And then one of the things is, what is a trigger event? What would make them want to hire you? What is the change or event in their life? What is the, oh crap, I've had enough, I'm going to ask for help. And knowing what those events are, because then back to your point, if you can get specific, if you can be sharing stories that tie to those, that illustrate that you understand them in that moment of frustration, that you've also been there, that you've been in that state, that you can make that connection to those moments, then again, it's powerful. And when they're trying to figure out, like, who do I hire to help me with my stories? Who do I hire to coach me? What service do I reach out to? There's a connection with you, and it makes a big difference. You can actually lead people to the steps too, because most of the market is not looking to buy right now. Most people aren't scrolling LinkedIn currently like, I want to buy something today. Some people are. Some people are very aware of their challenge and very aware that they want a solution. Most aren't. So if your content, your stories, your ideas can help lead the breadcrumb trail and illuminate and teach them some things and show them some things, so when they get to that trigger point, and you can also maybe be the guide to that trigger point, then they're going to engage you more likely to, because you played that role in helping them. You've built that rapport and relationship with them along the path.
So the idea with the breadcrumbs, which is also something else I've heard you talk about, but the idea there, I guess, would be you're trying to share an experience of you, because the assumption, and I know in your case it is true, but the assumption here is that you are where your ideal or your dream client or your target client would want to be. Mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to share stories from every step of that journey in the hopes that someone is going to look at it and go, this is me. That you're just describing what I'm going through, or you're just describing what I've just gone through. And that would make them go, okay, well, this person is on the same path as me, which means that arguably they know how to get to that destination over there. And the other thing that I like about your approach, and it's something that I try to convince people of on a regular basis, is the stuff you share is not usually anything other than ordinary, and I use this not in a derogatory term, in a derogatory sense. So can you, I mean, I have some examples here, but can you just, from the top of your head, just mention some of the types of personal stories that you've, or even professional stories that you've shared over the last few months, so people have an idea of what hell I'm talking about?
My first French kiss. I wrote a story about my first French kiss and the power of having that person like coach and mentor me into becoming a better kisser, and how much frustration and challenges and mistakes that person helped me avoid by being literally like coaching me into being a better kisser. Going on a French War Revolution tour, like something my partner and I did when we were in Paris. I'm really interested in history. She's not. I paid for us to go. She tagged along, and then just highlighting what she remembered and what I remembered. But there was a lesson there, because one of the things in the revolution that made a difference was access to the printing press and the explosion of newspapers. And that's kind of what's going on LinkedIn right now. They don't have to be big moments. Those are two things that came to mind right away. I'm sure if I stared at the ceiling for a moment, I could think of some other ones.
There was one which you have on YouTube, which is it has more views than anything else you've probably ever done. I think it's pushing on 70,000 views on LinkedIn now. And I think you did something very smart there. You put the word manifestation in the title. And manifestation, if you look at the list of other videos that show up with that word, a lot of them have a lot of views. It is this story about how you wanted an idea, you had an idea for a job, and this is your ideal job, and then you saw the ad, quit your current job without having gotten the dream job, and through a weird set of circumstances, you ended up getting it. And I read and I watched that, and I was thinking, was that the job that you only lasted a few months and then quit to do what you're doing now, or no? Was that earlier in your
It's
personal
earlier
journey?
in my career. That story happened in like 2006 or 7. I was there. I was at that job for 3 years, and then I left that job to go back to music for a bit and to go run a business with my partner. So I was at that job for 3 years. Yeah, and it wasn't even just that I hadn't got the job yet, Francisco. I submitted my resignation letter at 9 a.m. that morning. I applied to that job at lunch. I hadn't applied yet. That's how certain I was. I resigned before I had even applied.
Yes, you could think of that as manifestation. We could also think of that as the one case in about 1,000 or 1,000,000 where that has actually worked. Yeah. And this is now proof that the destiny, that the universe will help you if you only, desire it enough. Whereas there's so many people now that are probably going, yeah, my wife left me after that. because I applied for the job. I never heard back. Yeah. And when they told me the salary was half of my current job. So,
well, exactly. I think the point you're bringing is that I wouldn't prescribe it. I'm not saying go do that. It's crazy. Like me even saying that to you, I sound like a crazy
But I'm sure
person.
some people are looking at that and going, "This is it. This is it. If I only want it enough, I will manifest it in my real life."
But I guess for me is that when I get to that point of conviction, like when I know something to be true, I've created it multiple times. I've did it with quitting my job this time to build my successful business. I've done it with finding money on the ground. And it's a woo-woo thing. Like this, we could go into the whole heart-led, like go off the rails where you're just going to be like uncomfortable because it sounds so ridiculous. I have done it. I have experienced it in my life. And that one is the most extreme. I can't think of a more extreme example than that. 1 in a million, 1 in 100 million, absolutely. It's funny to think that you're right, that the fact that someone watched that, got inspired, quit their job, now their wife has left them, and they're sitting in a desolate hotel room that they can barely afford.
How many lives have you ruined with that story, Rob? Well, I think I'm not a woo-woo type of person. I think that there's a lot of things that are hard to explain in life. I think a lot of things are easy to explain when we turn them upside down and look at them from different angles. Because one of the things about this whole manifestation thing is that it's almost never a story about I sat in my living room, I really wanted this, and then it just happened. It's, I really wanted this, so I applied for the job. In that interview, you probably tried everything you could have when it was going wrong, and you accidentally found that you and the person were from the same small town in Canada. But you were there trying, and you were someone who had a certain set of skills, and you were enthusiastic about it. So there's a lot going for you other than just the universe. And I think I understand it to be a case of focus sometimes, because a lot of people say, "Oh, how?" Because not that I'm massively successful or anything, but there's a lot of stuff I'm doing at the moment. And you're like, "How did you manage to start a podcast with a baby in the house and do all this other stuff you're doing at the same time?" It's like, well, I just decided I was going to do it, and I put my spare time into doing it. So where do you find the time? Well, I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. At the time I didn't spend as much time on LinkedIn as I do now, and I didn't watch TV, and then I stayed up until midnight most nights. You can find 2 or 3 hours in your day if those things are happening. So it's not, did I manifest it? Well, no, I decided I wanted to do it, and then I did a whole bunch of stuff to make it happen. But you have to want it in the first place. If you don't want it, then it's probably never going to happen on its own accord.
Because what you're talking about is a level of commitment to it. So it's that no matter what the obstacles are, that you're going to figure it out. Because you just listed a bunch of things that would have stopped other people. They're like, I'm busy, and then there's the small child, and you make a bunch of excuses. And they're good excuses that most people would say, like, yeah, that's not an excuse, that's a valid reason. But when you get so focused and you are, yes, I am definitely going to do this, then you figure out a way. And I think that's, if we go back to my manifestation story, I think that was a big part of it too, is that one, I had burned my boats. I had no options. I had to figure out a way to do it, and I was really hyper-focused on it. So I had to find a way. Like I had no choice. But with everything, it does require work. It requires focus. Before I was able to quit my last cushy director level job to do what I'm doing now, I was getting up at 5:45 or 6 every day. I was working over lunch. I was working most evenings. I had blocked out, just like you explained, like people, if people saw how much time they were wasting on Instagram or Facebook and then spent half of that time on something else, then yeah, they could have the things that you have. So I think that's a really great example, Francisco.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is something that people don't realize, how much time we spend doing any of the things we spend in. And I'm guilty as that as anyone else. Now the thing that I tended to fool myself about was how much time I spent with the podcast, for example. And then at one point I realized, okay, but hold on, if I put the research in, and then the recording, and then the editing, and then, whatever I have to do to promote it, like I can easily spend 4 hours per episode. easily, if it's an easy episode to edit, that, you know, so and you don't think it's that case. It could be more. It has been more. And then you do that, and then whatever else you're doing on social media. And I'm just talking about useful things. I'm not even talking about just browsing and going, oh, I want to be inspired and entertained. I'm pretending I'm not just keeping my brain tumbling over without giving it any real, making it work at all. But yeah, and I think and this is why stories like that, I think people can sometimes take the wrong lesson from it, because there's a lot of things in that story that suggest that it was you with a very large heaping of luck, and focus and knowing what you want. But a lot of people can watch that story and go, if I only wanted enough, that is the secret. I mean, literally, is the
The
secret.
secret, which is a big part of that that's missed. This idea that you can just will it without doing it, willing without
Mm,
making change,
mm,
focus without making effort. Yeah, the idea that I'm going to sit here and just think about better six pack, bigger biceps, but not go to the gym, not change my diet, not change anything else, and not surround myself with other people who are dedicated and focused like that. So when I am tired because I didn't sleep well, because the baby woke me up, or because I ended up having that piece of cake, then I justify like, oh, I'm going to sleep in today. No, it's very intentional.
mm. And the other thing about the manifestation type of ideas is that they are ignoring something for which I will forget the scientific name now. The reticular, whatever. There is something in the brain where if you're thinking about something constantly, you tend to see it more often. You know, the example everybody uses is, if you're looking for new, I don't know, new shoes, new trainers or whatever, and you want them from, I don't know, Adidas. All of a sudden you're seeing Adidas shoes everywhere. It's just because your brain now realized, okay, well, this is important. I'm gonna open the filter up and not just, filter this out as noise, because clearly this is something you're interested in. And I noticed that with myself and with other people when it comes to stories, which is, this was never something you valued, typically, at least as something you could use yourself. And then they work with me, or they work with someone that does the stuff, or they just have an epiphany, and all of a sudden they're seeing stories everywhere. They're looking at posts they like on social media and go, oh, this is someone is actually telling a story here. Or they're talking to their friends and they go like, oh, yesterday this was oh yeah, it is telling me a story now.
Mhm.
But you never realized what it was. Your brain just wasn't paying attention to it that way. So it's not as if it wasn't there before. You just weren't paying enough attention,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, I think you're totally right. The same thing happens with cars. You talked about trainers. We bought a new car, and I hadn't noticed that kind of Toyota car on the road before. The moment we bought it, every time I leave the house, I see dozens of them, because now what I'm focused on is different. I think the stories one is interesting to realize that it's there, because gossip. What is gossip? It's
Mm.
someone telling a story. The business books that do the best tend to be the ones that interwove stories into them, instead of here's the 15 things you need to do to improve your business now. And then when you realize that, yeah, that's what people talk about. Those are the news pieces that do the best. The posts on social medias that get shared more, the adverts, like those adverts that people are like, it's crazy to me that people take commercials and then share it. Like, this is a beautiful commercial. It's a story with a logo at the end. Uh, it's the stories. It's always stories.
There's something you said in that presentation I watched, which is which is something clients tell you, or prospective clients tell you, something along the lines of, "You've read my mind," or "Stop reading my mind," uh, and that is something that is very powerful. And it doesn't need to be stories. You can just say the things,
Mhm.
but I think we tend to have our barriers up a little bit when it's someone's opinion. If you say, oh, this is what is happening, this is what is happening in your life, and you're worried about this, and eh, it's just, one, it's like, who are you to tell me what I'm thinking? And even if you are thinking that, the barriers go up. Like, you don't, this is your opinion, right? You don't, there's no authority there. Whereas if you're saying, this is what I'm going through, I'll go, okay. Oh, that sounds pretty familiar. Oh,
Mhm.
Jesus, this is too familiar. You're reading my mind, Rob.
I love the way you're saying that because the barriers up thing, I imagine myself going into like a palm reader or something. And if I was to go into a palm reader, then I'm super guarded. And what is this person saying? And clearly there's my BS filter is on maximum. So to have someone who's just saying, you're thinking this, you're feeling this is what's happening versus, yeah, it's the stories are a Trojan horse. People will back to the commercial. I was just joking. Like I can't believe that someone has spent millions of dollars to craft an advert that then people are intentionally watching, people are searching for on YouTube and then sharing on social media. That's the perfect Trojan horse. And it works the same way here with making clients feel seen and heard is that you use a story to make a connection and then they relate to it and then they see themselves in the story and they relate to the story.
I I assume that everybody knows what a Trojan horse is, but I don't actually assume that everybody knows what the original story is, because Trojan is a condom brand. I think there was a big virus as well that people got through porn called Trojan Horse, uh, but I don't think a lot of people know the original story. And if I recall correctly, it was a war between it was Sparta and Athens, maybe, but it was a Greek war, and then or a Greece and someone else, and then the Greeks made this enormous wooden horse as a present to the Trojans, obviously. Um, and they gave this horse as a present, and inside the horse there were a whole bunch of Greek warriors, and that's the idea of the Trojan horse. And it's actually in Portuguese we have an idiom which you call something a Greek's gift.
Ooh.
Yeah, which is the same sort of idea,
Yeah.
and it's a I hadn't heard that metaphor be used for stories, but it's a perfect example because stories have this thing where they're not a push strategy, they're a pull strategy. You're not pushing information out or opinions out to people, and you're not being pushy with them either. You're putting the stuff out there, and it's pulling them in. So there is a meaning in there. There is a lesson you're trying to impart, but you're not saying this is what I'm trying to say. Blah. You're going, oh, this thing happened, and go like, oh, I think the lesson there is, yeah. Sometimes you will reinforce what the message is, but you still hopefully letting the story do most of the heavy lifting, and you're just hoping that the meaning is all those sneaky, naked warriors coming in to stab you to death. Now that metaphor perhaps is not one we should explain in great detail if we're trying to use this in a positive way.
Yeah, I think the metaphor works great as long as you stop at the fact that then they woke up in the middle of the night, snuck out of the horse, and killed everyone in their sleep. So maybe
Yes,
keep that part out.
I don't think you want to say, "Oh, stories are like a beautiful Trojan horse," and before you know it, you're dead in your sleep. That might not be the meaning we're trying to impart from this. Right. So as we're coming to the end of the time that I knew we had today, I did want to touch on how much do you use stories in your client work? Because we talked mostly about how you use it to attract clients.
Mhm.
But when you're speaking to people, do you make a point of using the same types of stories to get the same types of lessons? Do you work a lot on sort of, the stories they tell themselves? So how does that work normally with you?
So yes to both, and so definitely the stories they tell themselves because the first part of everything I do with everyone is that belief that you can do it, that you're worthy of it, that the confidence of it, and getting that clarity. And a big part of that is what are the stories that you're telling yourself? Like who are you? And then we were going full circle here because you started earlier talking not being able to read the label from inside the jar. So then we help them identify, their journey, their story, their lessons, their learnings, so that they can really embrace their unique power, their unique gifts that make them who they are. And a lot of that is seeped in story. And then the other part, definitely when the first course I made, every module had a story. There's like, here's some theory, here's some examples, here's some worksheets, but every single module had a story. And when I'm creating stuff now, maybe not every module has a story, some good analogies, some other which are still kind of a story, because it does allow people to, again, connect to it, relate to it. It's one thing for me to say it, but if I can give you an example of a past client who applied this and did this, and this is the outcome, or I lived through this, or relate it to some other aspect of your life where you can use that framework to decode it, to digest it, then stories are incredibly powerful.
Hmm. something is interesting that not many people know how to do, but it can be used as well if you're thinking of a training course, if you're thinking of content, which is not only the stories as part of the content that you're providing, but also stories as a structure. And this is probably the only point, I think, where things like the hero's journey or the sort of longer type of story templates can be used effectively, because they're very complicated to use if you're just trying to tell a story, because it's like, oh, what is the call to adventure, and now the guide has to come in, and now it's a pit of despair, uh, meet the goddess, whatever. It gets very complicated, but there's a lot of things that are very interesting and easy to relate to. And if you're trying to trace sort of the journey that someone that becomes either a coach or whatever you're trying to become, there are points in there that are very easy to identify. So, part of it could just be, this is the ordinary world. So this is the beginning. This is the ordinary world, and then there is a call. Something is changing. There's a call to adventure that you refuse, and you have reasons to be refusing that call. But then, there comes a guide, and the guide's gonna help you do this, and these are the challenges you're gonna face. And then if you're successful, this is what's going to happen, and now you can go back to what used to be the ordinary world, but now you're changed, and now you can bring that knowledge back and help other people. So so it works perfectly if you're trying to get someone from I've used this before, but you're trying to get someone from pain to power, which is the summary of the hero's journey. So that there's a lot of those points that can be used well, and you can do that and have the stories within, because then you're using your own stories or client stories to just make that a lot more concrete, and a lot more with more examples, and more alive, and not just a whole bunch of theory. So yeah, the
I,
useful
I,
thing,
yeah, I
stories.
like using the hero's journey roadmap because when I was talking earlier about the breadcrumbs or the trail to lead people down the path. Then yeah, if you just want to overlay that on the story's journey, as you just so eloquently did, it's a really great way to help people go through the steps that they
Mm.
need to go through so that they can end up in power, so that they can then be a guide for someone else, or then can spread the gospel to new people.
And this is something I got from JJ Peterson from Storybrand, and I, I keep coming back to it because it's such a powerful idea, and one I think you like is, he talks about how most stories have essentially four characters. You have the hero, you have the villain, you have the guide, and you have the victim. And he says, well, no one wants to be the victim, and no one should be happy with staying in that particular role. Then he says that the major difference between a hero and a villain is that both of them have suffered pain in their past. The hero wants redemption, the villain wants to avenge that pain. And the guide is obviously the one that is not focused in being the hero, but helping the hero along. And he said that the one thing he tries to keep in his mind at all times is, don't try to be obviously don't be the villain or the victim. Don't try to be the hero. Just be the guide. Like, that's your job. It's not to be successful, it's not whatever, it's just to help other people along. Because if you keep thinking that way, you end up being the hero to a lot of people. But it's just a more, I think it just forces you into an immediate attitude that you wouldn't necessarily have if you're concerned about being the one that achieves something.
I like that a lot because we were talking earlier about connecting to clients and being relatable and the way I use stories to really make that powerful connection with people. If I'm telling stories where I'm always the hero, then there's a bit of air of BS at some point. We were joking earlier about how great and perfect I am, but I want them to feel that they are the hero. I want them to feel that they can be the hero. I want them to go on their own journey. So it the guide role is best because the people you're speaking to, your dream clients, you want them to be the hero and you want to lead them on their own journey.
Mm. Yeah, and there's a trick here that should feel free to copy, which is, you can you can get over the BS and the arrogance that comes with telling stories where you're the hero very easily. And the way you do that is by making yourself the the hapless hero. So you will achieve the things you've achieved but you were a complete mess throughout and you have no idea what you're doing and you're struggling. And then someone, which could be some person that helped you in your career, could be your wife, could be a
Mhm.
friend, just sort of went, Rob, what the hell are you doing, man? This is not what you want. And you go, now I realize what I should be doing. So you're still achieving all those things and you can still saying I've done that, but now you've given people a ton of things to relate to,
Mhm.
and they can go, oh yeah, that's me. That's exactly how where I was, where I am.
Mhm.
But you still being able to do that while telling people, I know what I'm doing because I've already done it. But the more hapless you sound, the more people can connect with you if they are in that place.
I like that because it's back to what we were talking earlier. Instead of just sharing highlight reels and look how perfect I am, it's showing the mistakes and that you're a mess and that you didn't have it together. And if you weave that story well, because I've used it, then people see like, oh, I can relate to that, but also that he got a guide and they helped him. Maybe I need a guide, and maybe Rob can be my guide. Maybe Francisco can be my guide. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. You want the elements to be, you want the elements to be in place, but that's one that helps a lot, is this
Mhm.
realization that not only I've been where you were, but also I got help. It's not by my own effort I just snapped, everything snapped into place. And I mean, that would be a terrible way to do that story. It's like, oh yes, it's just like me. Oh, he sorted it out by himself. Oh, great. Thanks, Rob. So don't use that. If anyone is out there, like, and I've said this to a friend. I was helping him prepare a speech for a competition, and in the speech he falls on the water, and then he thinks he's gonna drown, and then eventually he doesn't and manages to make his way back to the boat where his friends are. And I said to him, if no one needs to help you for you to get out of there, then you could always have done it by yourself, which means that you are never in any actual danger. There is no challenge for you to overcome because it was all up to you anyway. And you can just get over that by having someone who's not is not a person be your guide. So maybe a seagull stopped near you, and because you were so, I don't know, you're delirious because of exhaustion that you're trying to stay above the water, you believe the seagull was talking to you, and you thought that sounded a bit demented, but you've done a lot of drugs in your past. Who knows, right? Um, and that is just the thing, the external thing that lets you find your way. It could be a dream, and people do this in movies all the time. They have a dream and they wake up and they remembered something important that turns the tide. But it has to be something that needs to feel that it wasn't just you. Something caused the dream, something, this the seagull or whatever. Because otherwise, you're right. People will get the message out of it that I'm just like this guy, and like this guy, I will make it on my own.
I'll figure it out. I don't need help. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
bravado continues. I don't need help. We're good.
Yes. All right. So this bravado will not continue now because we're coming up to our time. But if people want to find you, what's the best place to go to do that?
The place I am most active, the community where I spend the most time is LinkedIn, is the place that I hang out the most. I also am on Instagram. Those would be the two best places. And yeah, it's RobbGilbear.
I'll put that on the show notes. And I don't think I've told you this before, but I spent a lot of time uh, reading your name wrong. I didn't know it was pronounced Gilbert, so to me it was always Rob. What did I think it was? I thought it was like Robb Gilbear or something like that. That sounded very, very different. It definitely wasn't Gilbert. I hadn't realized it was the French thing. So yeah, Gilbear.
Beer.
Yeah, I'm glad I figured that out before we did this.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for having me.
Uh, Thank you too, Matt. I hope given the long wait or the time that we've talked about doing this has this has been what you expected. I definitely got we definitely had a lot of fun. We might have even made some sense in between all the other nonsense.
Maybe. I think if there's one thing, the big takeaway is if you had said yes when I first messaged you, we might have had an okay conversation. It might have
Mm.
stayed a bit more business focused. There's no way it would have been this enjoyable. There's no way there would have been this many laughs. There's no way that it would have been this kind of banter. So it was absolutely worth the wait.
And I don't think I would have gotten enough to justify titling the titling the episode "Heart-Led Stories About Microdicks" with Robb Gilbear, which might or might not be the episode. All right. Thanks again for your time, mate. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.